Hi, welcome to another review. This is going to be one where I cover a large range of models that all have a similar theme. So like the last time I did this, I had half frames with dual lenses. Now I have half frames with shield lenses. So I want to take a look at everything from the original ones all the way up to the ones that were just released, so you can sort of see an evolution happening. So starting with 1984, Oakley started releasing one model every year. So 84 we had the eye shade, 85 we had the frog, and then in 86 we started having a whole string of sport related models, starting with the blade. And the blade was basically just a very simple shield frame with a top brow, two stems, and basically it also had replaceable nose pads too. So the blades, unlike the M frames and everything else, just had very simple flat nose pieces here, no grips, no ribbing, nothing that was terribly complex. And after this, we had some straight stems, but the year later we had the razor blade, and the razor blade is what we commonly think of for that old style. So with the re-release we had lately, the staple editions, the heritage, everything like that, we always say razor blade, but really it was the blade which came out first, but then the razor blade kind of took off, mainly because it had a very small lens profile. You also commonly see it with the trigger stem here, and while the razor blade typically did have the trigger stem and the blade just had the regular straight stem, there were stem kits that allow you to swap between the two of these. Now given the age of these, I don't really swap them all that much, but I just sort of keep whatever is. But basically you could buy kits and then kind of rearrange them, change colors, change styles, pretty much do whatever you want. So you could do lenses, everything. This is actually a stock configuration, which is kind of cool. I found an old catalog from back in the 80s, and it listed all the stock configurations before you could change around everything. And the orange with gray was actually a stock one, so it's kind of cool to find this one and have it be completely factory original. Then we also had one more, which was called the Slit Lens, and this one, just like the M-frame strip, if you remember that video a while back, is an even lower profile lens that's really just cuts it down to the bare minimum, so any more and you'd be letting in way too much light. But again, it came with a few stock configurations, typically the triggers, and then a couple different things like violet mirror, orange mirror, and then the traditional grays and blacks. So after Oakley was done with those three models, just by basically changing the lens, maybe adding a couple trigger kits, there's not a whole lot more, they took the dive into something a little bit more advanced. So in 1989 we have the Mumbo. And the Mumbo is basically kind of almost building on the same thing. You still have the main bridge here, but you'll notice that it does curve down in the middle here. And unlike the straight stem here, that kind of gave it its iconic look. So the hinges are basically going to be very similar to the blades, but now we have the introduction of an Unobtainium ear sock for extra grip. So since these are basically geared towards a sport model, you want to make sure that they stay on your head. So in addition to the ear socks, they also added some ridges to the nose piece here. This gives it a little bit extra grip, and it's not as flat and slick as the ones you found on the blade. So after a few months, not too long, there was a conflict with Mambo clothing, and they weren't allowed to use the name Mumbo anymore, even though it wasn't exactly the same. It was too close, and they just didn't want to deal with the legal headache. So what they did is, for a while they had boxes called the M frame, and underneath it was part of the Mumbo system, so people kind of knew it was the same model, just a different name. And then eventually it was just the M frame, because they didn't want to say Mumbo, but it's still, everyone knew what it was, so it's just the M frame. And of course nowadays we take M frame for granted, we say it all the time, and it's really just sort of common name for those models at this point. So we had, basically there was very little difference between the Mumbo and the M frames that came after it. One thing is that the original Mumbos actually had the blade nose pieces to them. So if you notice, the gap in the lens here is a little bit bigger than the ones you see on the original M frames and then later on. So you could actually, if you wanted to create a pure stock Mumbo, you'd actually need to get a blade nose piece and put it in there. I actually have one of the accessory kits on this because they came with all these different color nose pieces and ear socks. But if you look down here, there is actually a very little gap there, which was designed to have that blade nose piece. After a while, they sort of went to a generation 2, and instead of the classic icon, we have just the traditional icon that we see on pretty much everything nowadays. This is the M-Frame Slash, and I'm not going to go into all the lens variations at this point because that's a whole other video which I need to, first of all, get the rest of the lens shapes that I need, but also it's going to take a lot more time just to go over lens shapes versus just models. The main difference between the Gen 1 and Gen 2, though, is in addition to the icon, and this one doesn't show it, but I don't have a Gen 2 on hand, but what would happen on the Gen 2 is that after the end here, it would actually extend a little bit more, and they were called fangs. So you have things called like hammer fangs. Here's the hammer, and then the fang will be a little bit past the unobtainium here. Gives you a little bit extra grip that maybe the unobtainium can't handle by itself. There's also a reinforced hinge here. So if you look at the hinge on the original, you notice it just sort of dips right past the axis there. Whereas on the Gen 2, it actually extends all the way to the curve in the hammer here. It gives it just a little bit extra leverage so these hinges won't snap as much. So it's just a little bit more reinforcement to make it a little bit more durable. In 1996/97, we have the Proem Frame. And this, just like the water jacket and the racing jacket, they didn't have hinges. It's a completely fixed frame. So basically it's a pro model because it's only going to be used by professionals in a race. And the main reason for the lack of hinges is that if you have it on your helmet and you want to put it on, sometimes you can have, and this was before we had the dual cam things, this could fall in, and as you try to put it on, it can kind of just prevent you from putting it on. And if you're in the middle of a race, you don't want anything that's going to compromise you being able to just take your glasses and put them on. So the lack of hinges pretty much enables that. So basically, no matter what you do, these will never fold because there are no hinges. So this also took a cue from like the eye jackets and the things of the time that used 3D CAD programs to design them. So unlike just flat frames where you sort of bend things at flat angles, this is completely 3D contoured. And this was so successful that eventually when we did move back to hinges and we got rid of the Gen 1, Gen 2 M frames, in 1999 we have the new M frame. Some people call these Gen 2, Gen 3, but basically the official name is the new M frame. In 1999, 2000, they redid a lot of models, so we actually have like the new eye jacket, the new straight jacket. We also had the wires did 2.0s and things like that. There was a huge line-wide change around that time where they actually changed to a new O-matter model too. So the O-matter on like the early eye jackets is completely different than the ones on the new eye jackets with a metal icon and all that. A lot more strong. It's a lot more of a nylon base, so it won't snap as much. So basically, it's going to be a little bit more durable. So again, the hinges are back, but we have the same shape as the Pro M frame. And pretty much everything from the Mumbo up until the later generations of new M frame, they would accept the lenses most of the time. Some of the very early ones are a little dodgy, but generally the lenses should fit all of the models from the Mumbo all the way up to the new M frame. So basically, the funny thing is I just picked this up like a few months ago, and it was my first new M frame. After all this and all my collecting, the first time I actually had this model, so it's kind of a cool pickup. So M frame had a pretty good run for quite a while, and it actually didn't get replaced right away. This had one of the longest models. This was 96 all the way until just a couple years ago. So this one had a pretty impressive run. But we kept the M frame around for a while, and we didn't move to a new model until the Radar came out. So I believe Radar came out 2006, and it was just a completely different model, or a completely different design. So we still had, obviously, 3D contouring, which is never going to go away because that's the norm now. But we had the same basic thing where we had a nose bridge here, ear socks. We had some venting, almost like a throwback to the 1998 models like the racing jacket. But we also had a nose piece here that was connected to the frame. So actually, in order to change the frame, you actually have to pull the nose frame out, get it out of the way, then you can pull the lens out. It also wraps around a lot more, so it's going to basically really secure that lens in. This lens will not come out without pretty much, in essence, destroying the frame. There's no way the lens is going to come out, pop out, anything like that. It's going to stay very fixed in here, not going to be a problem. This did come in a couple different lens shapes that are not compatible, obviously, with the M frame. They had different names, but sort of similar styles. So we have, this is the range lens, which was very similar to like the heater of the M frame. We had the path lens, which was very similar to, I believe, the hybrid. And then we have the pitch lens, which is similar to the strike. Not exact, but ballpark. Then, after a couple years, I think it's 2010 or so, we have the radar lock. They look very similar, and they were kind of meant to look very similar. We do have some different lug accents here on the radar lock, but generally, you know, the ear socks, nose piece, the fact that it's connected, all going to be pretty much similar. All right, so unlike the traditional radar where you just unlock the nose piece to take the lens out, this one added a little bit extra to prevent the lens not only from coming out, but just to secure it a little bit better and not distort the optics. So the lens behaves like normal, but there's a small piston on the other side where if you pull that aside, you can actually open up the temple area which exposes the lens. So the temple is independent of this, not connected, but this just completely comes out of the way, and then you pull the lens out, replace it, snap that back in place, and then the lens will, or so the hinge will behave like normal. So in addition to having one extra thing that's holding the lens in place, it's also going to help with the optics. So the optics are pretty much pure out by themselves, but sometimes when you put them into a frame and there's stress, it's distorting it, it's adding a little bit of extra play to it, you're going to compromise those optics. And even if it's just a millimeter, all day long performance activities, that does add up and it does make a difference. So basically by having something holding the lens in place as opposed to being pressure fit into place, you're not distorting the lens and you're going to get the best optics possible. All right, so before I move on to the most recent ones, I'm going to go over a couple sort of oddballs that occurred in the meantime. Well, after the thump came out, we started seeing this on Lance Armstrong and some of his races, and we really didn't know what it was. It had the thump accents to it, but obviously it was an M frame. It didn't have any, you know, storage or speakers or anything like that. And eventually we found out it was called the M frame 2, although that was sort of a slightly incorrect name. It's actually the SI Ballistic M frame 2. So typically we didn't really get a true sequel to the M frame until a little bit later. But it did still have ear socks to it. It still had the icon. It still had lenses that were compatible with the rest, although the only difference here is that there's a clip and actually a hole in the lens which goes over the bridge and it holds that lens in place. So before we had the radar or anything like that, this is going to prevent this lens from dislodging from the frame in case a projectile hits it or something like that. Just adds a little bit extra to the mil-spec specifications, just to make sure this is going to be very safe for, you know, obviously people being deployed and whatnot. A little bit later, we also had another one come out, which looked very similar, but obviously wasn't the same. And this is the SI Ballistic M frame 3. A few different differences here. There's no unobtainium. It's very sleek. There's no icon, so the M frame 2, as well as the new M frame, had that same thin icon, which you could swap between a lot of different models. This got rid of that, got rid of the unobtainium, and it actually does have a slightly different lens here. It's called the M frame Agro strike lens. Same basic, you know, shape on the bottom, but it's just fitted slightly different, so they gave it a different name that basically fits this. Still has the clip here, and I actually have the gasket attachment to it, which doesn't come default, but you can buy it for, I think, like 15 bucks. And what this does is it clips over the frame, and when you put it on, it creates a complete barrier against your eyes for wind, dust, if you're in a storm, if you're overseas and there's something like that. It's basically going to prevent anything from going inside your eyes from the side, up, down, whatever. I think it makes it look a lot nicer, and it's kind of a cool addition. So basically my M frame 3 has that as part of it. All right, so those two came out sort of aside from the traditional releases. They're more of just an SI only thing. Then we move back to the regular releases. So now we go forward a few more years, and we have the M2. Not the M frame 2, because it'd be confusing, just the M2. Same general design. You got the dip in there. You got unobtainium, which is kind of almost matching the flak jacket too, where it kind of separates in a few different spots. It does still have the hammers, which the M Frame 2 and 3 went away with. It's detachable, so you can actually customize this. And this is an Oakley custom model here. So I got the retina burn frame, carbon fiber wings, and a fire lens. And as you see, I'm trying to do the yellow with fire every so often, so figured, why not? The lenses are sort of compatible with the new M frame. They will physically fit, but they're not ideal. I forget which is which, but one ends up being a little too tight and the other one ends up being a little too loose. So will they fit? Yes, but I would not recommend it, especially in a performance model where you really need to have that lens made for the frame that's supposed to be in. Unlike the M frames though, it didn't have any lens alterations. This is the lens you get, and this is the only one that's possible. Aside from the Asian fit, which actually is a slightly reduced one. So technically there are two lenses, but if you buy a traditional standard or global fit M2, you only get this one lens. The Asian fit one kind of goes down. This curve here goes all the way down to the nose piece here, and then this is a little bit shorter. But generally it's going to be the same general shape. It doesn't have a name, unlike the M frames, which have like strike and pitch and all that stuff. So you basically they didn't bother giving it a name because there's only one. All right, this year, 2015, we finally get a new model, and this is an extension of the radar. It's called the Radar EV. And at first I thought EV stood for evolution, but it's not. It actually stands for extended vision. So just like the Tombstone, which came out right before this, and then the Jawbreaker, peripheral vision on the side is important, but they already sort of took care of that. And since it doesn't have any frame down here, that's not an issue. The main thing is that peripheral vision on the top has been found to be important because there are things that this top brow here might block. Something could be coming from above. So what they did is they extended the lens up a bit more, just so there's not anything getting in the way of your upper vision. As such, the lenses will not be compatible with any other model because they have that extra piece there. And it's going to be pretty much unique. There are a couple lens shapes, so it does come in path and pitch, just like the radar. There is no range at this time. And they basically have the same curvature at the bottom, so even though they're not exactly the same, they kind of follow the same guidelines. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try on each one of these except for the old models because I'm afraid of those breaking, just so you can kind of see how they all look on and give you a quick overview of what they look like. So we'll start with the 1996-97 Proem Frame, and this is in the hybrid S lens, which is the smallest one possible, aside from the strip lens, which is more of a specialty. Moving on to the new M frame with the strike lens. Then the radar with the range lens. And this is the biggest one possible for the standard radar. There is a radar XL with a blade lens, sort of a throwback to the blade name. I don't have an example of that yet, but the nose piece here actually dips down a bit more, so it kind of rises up, and then there's an extra large lens. The radar lock with the pitch lens. The SI Ballistic M Frame 2.0 with the strike lens. The SI Ballistic M Frame 3.0 with the gasket kit. The M2 in global fit. And then finally the Radar EV with the path lens. Okay. All right, so hopefully at some point I can do a lens video because there's a lot more that I haven't shown here, especially with the old M frames, which had a lot of different lens options. The radar basically had range, path, pitch, edge, which is sort of the very small women's model, and then the XL blades. The radar lock had pretty much most of those. I don't think it had the edge, but it did have an XL blade edition. The EV only comes in path and pitch. And again, the M2 only has the Asian fit and the standard fit. Just this year in the fall, they actually just came out with an M Frame XL, which is a larger version. Not too much larger, but it does have a little bit extra bulk in here. And then weirdly enough, it has an Asian fit XL with a reduced lens. So we'll see where that kind of fits into the gamut of things. But I'll wait until I pick up with some of those so I can have a whole video where I go over everything. But hopefully for now you can kind of see what happens from start to finish and how we've gone from this very simple blade to the more advanced Radar EV. As always, hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you later. Thanks.